my name is James PFP. This is the Banjocast. Pitchforks and flaming torches. See, I'm getting pretty good at that. I've been listening back to some of my own work, though. I recognize my voice isn't getting better. Meaning to say, my pronunciation isn't always, how to put it, as good as it could be. So I'll work on that in the future. Hey, what we got going on overnight tonight? Well, for the next little while. I have two things to do. I was thinking about this earlier. Did I skip over anything unduly quickly when talking about the news earlier? In case you might remember, or maybe you joined me earlier, I was looking at a couple of CBC News articles. Look at the flood damage here for a moment. Call into attention that the news article was talking about particularly that the ice in the river was particularly bad, okay? Water levels in Corner Brook. This is in Corner Brook. Water levels really, really high. No ice to be seen, but water levels really, really high. And then where was this? Little Rapids, okay. Halfway Point, okay. And Trout River, that's in a whole other location. I was looking for the ice. Okay, here's another one. Corner Brook, outside of Corner Brook on the highway. Okay, I'll point that out. Humber River threatened to overtake resident Angie Moss's yard. Okay, and this one, float plane hangars in Deer Lake. Don't see a heck of a lot of ice there, but we do see some. And then here, ice was flowing down the Humber River near the Nicholsville Bridge this week. But ice jams became one of the issues. This is at the Nicholsville Bridge down the Humber River, okay? That's what this article says. I am now going to draw this to your attention. Yeah, I said there might have been a little bit of shenanigans in the wordings and stuff. I'm not saying there was no ice entirely. I am going to dispute where the issue was. Here's the Humber River. Here's Deer Lake. Is this called Humber up here too? Not entirely sure what river, if this is all considered Humber. In which case, here's the source of the Humber. Oh, it can't be that way. That's on the other side of the mountains. So here, picking up water all through a river valley through here, and then it goes into a lake. And then there's this Humber River. Here's Little Rapids, that was mentioned. Humber Village, that was mentioned. This was some of those river shots I was saying there was no ice evident. Well, farther up this lake here, miles, kilometers, miles up this lake. This is where you will find the Nicholsville Bridge. This is where the ice was backed up. Up here. Right. Ice was flowing down the Humber River near the Nicholsville Bridge this week, but ice jams became a new concern. I don't think the jams are causing the water to back up. That's my point. I don't think it's log jams that are causing the water to back up in this situation. I do believe. And if we look nearby, with a large area of development in terms of residential areas and stuff. So if there were a large snowfall, for example, there might be a place where trucks and things go right down to the river and dump the snow rather than leave it piled up on the side of the road. You know, they might hire a dump truck or something, a local transport company, to get rid of the snow by throwing it in the nearby water. And they might do it here rather than here, depending on where they are. I also draw your attention to the regional airport, which is right around the corner on the river, to the south of the river. And there you can also see a golf course. Well, you look at that. That's got to be a fault line, right? It is a fault line. Or the course of an old river, maybe? Overgrown river? No water features marked through that part of the map. Wonder what the other map says. Terrain. Yeah, fault line. So that's the first thing. This news story seems to have been putting these pictures farther and farther up the so-called Humber River, on the other side of the bloody lake, in fact, when this water is downriver of that. Quite a distance downriver. And Trout River. Is right here. As you can see, also a particularly geographically diverse area. This is what they call the tablelands off here to the side. They go straight up in the air. They're quite high. If I show the terrain, can't show the terrain in this map. I have to go on the other one, right? Yeah. Here's the terrain map for Trout River. Can you see why they might have some issue with water if there was a lot of runoff or a lot of snow which immediately melted because the temperatures went up quickly? What was a cold snap turned into a warm snap after a shit ton of snow falling? Look at all the altitude. Whoa. This is Trout River. Fair bit of sediment already getting deposited offshore there, I would think. Not a very big community. Nice horseshoe bay there. Probably sandy or very fine pebble rock. Trout River Bay. Look at the waves on the water and everything. Whoa. Bond Bay, Norris Point. These are more popular tourist destinations. They're practically on the main road here. But you have to get off at different areas to get to them. There's a place called Lomond in here. In through these arms are very, very sheltered waters. Great area for doing oceanographic research, I'm told and understand. Lobster Cove has a, what do you call it, a lighthouse. Really cool lighthouse. And then I think I've already gone over what's up here. Sally's Cove, an interesting place, but here, Shallow Bay, I believe. And Cow Head, is that here? And St. Paul's. That's Shallow Bay. Cowhead, Shallow Bay. Two of them very similar. And this is sand spit area. All this is sand dunes. Not a very common feature. I don't think they had as much flooding as you'd find farther down in the watershed. So that would be that. Thanks a lot, CBC. Hey, speaking of Canadian broadcasting, I thought perhaps we'd have a little bit of fun tonight. Oh, I haven't been showing anything. Damn. I just wasted my time for the last 5 minutes. Someone should have told me. I could at least see recently closed tabs. Google Maps. And also that one. Okay, I'll do this quickly again. Here's the flood damage, Benoit's Cove. What I was looking for are the river shots. River close to Corner Brook here in Margaret Bowater Park. Road at Halfway Point. That's Trout River here with the mountain in behind. Trout River again. The river outside of Corner Brook on the Humber River on the way back toward what's called Deer Lake. On Deer Lake and then Nicholsville. So I'm going to show you where these places are. Starting from Corner Brook, where there's a river running down through here. Humber Village, this is what's called the Humber River. Humber River, I guess, runs out of this lake, Deer Lake, and also into the lake, according to the news article. But here's Little Rapids, one of the places in the article. And here is the Nicholsville Bridge. It's right here. I'll turn on satellite view for a moment. Here is one of the areas of greatest concentrated residential living, Deer Lake. I guess there's a lot of snow has to come off the roads from time to time. Perhaps they dump it in the river, I don't know. Here's the airport, right here as well. Also needs to have a road surface cleaned and the snow removed. Sometimes I guess you could dump it in the water. And then there's, well, the golf course, so you don't bother removing snow from these things. But hey, I noticed when I was looking here at the satellite, you can see that there's a geographic feature here, a fault line in the region. If I turn on the map and go to terrain view, you'll see it as well. Because this area is where it becomes, it's like there are foothills, our little foothills region is here with this huge fault line running off this way. And there's all these stacked fault lines going out through the various, look at all that, hey? Reason I mention it. So we have to go this way to get to Trout River. Maybe I'll turn Trout River on this way instead. Here's Trout River. More geography. This is called more geography. Geography. This is called the Tablelands. This a region. Tablelands. Here's Trout River. Part of the watershed's flowing that way. Part of the watershed's coming off either side. So that's why they're flooding. And if I were to do the terrain here again, we'll see the region is contending with. There's quite a huge difference in elevation along this feature. Even more here, look. This is Bombay and Norris Point, Norris. And you go farther north, you cross into the end of the park. Right here is what's called Shallow Bay. I was pointing that out. You can see the mountain ranges back off the shoreline. And then there's this region that goes all the way up through before kind of turning off generally to tundra. So that was that. And then there's this. Seeing as CBC has provided me my chuckle for tonight. Speaking of Canadian broadcasting, here is a film, documentary film, published by my country's National Film Board about a premiere, I once had. Premiere of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador from 2003 to 2010. By the time he left, he became the most popular and controversial Canadian politician of his era. He released a book famously 6 months. This Well, I don't necessarily need to draw it on the screen here, but he published the book within 6 months of his retirement in 2010. A little suspicious, if you ask me. But don't allow me to color your viewing. Do we need to full screen this? Nah, I want room to work with.
Two, one, two, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2. Check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh.
Check. 1, 2, 3.
I want to be over here.
Phone number and address. You want to call
Hey Jay, for your, how are you?
Not great.
Like you're awaiting your best audience yet, in a way.
It's like giving your own eulogy.
Your own eulogy, right, Mike? I have to be quite honest about this. When Danny retired, as I said, he published the book within 6 months of the retirement. Speaking about his eulogy and stuff, like he'd already written the book. The thing was at the publishers. It's being edited. So yeah, like his own eulogy. He retired young. He didn't stick around for 30 years.
Somebody say something to make me laugh, please.
Take my wife.
Orson Welles once said that if you want a happy ending, you need to know when to end your story. And so I've called you all here today to announce
Like I told him.
the end of my story as the 9th Premier of Newfoundland and
6
Labrador.
months later, book published.
You know, I laugh when critics and some reporters say
Showbiz
that I'm nothing
ending.
more than a fighter. Someone always looking for a racket, never happy unless I'm taking someone on. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you today that those people are right.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Danny. Mr. Williams, sir. Ice hockey. Ice surface. Look at that. Shinny.
The people of Newfoundland had expressed their desire to enter into Confederation. The date of union on which...
What we're hearing in the background here is a previous premier. His name was Joseph Smallwood. He was our first premier after joining Confederation with Canada. I was just about to make a note here too. I'll let it play while I do so.
we have set our sights is March 31st, 1949.
A bullet point down here for Danny. Because he isn't stupid.
We are dealing with a man named Steve.
Harper.
And Steve, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, said that Atlantic Canadians had a culture of defeat. Well, let me tell you, Steve, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have no culture of defeat.
Danny
Let me tell you
Williams.
that. We are fighting Newfoundlanders. We rant and roar like true Newfoundlanders. And we will not give up on this cause. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Nice title, guys. Nice title. They simply call it Fighting Danny. How about good Danny hunting? That could work too, right? Alternative titles. Accepting alternative titles. Wow, where are we? I don't recognize this building offhand. I recognize the man as Mr. Williams. Well, where the fuck are we?
I was born in 1949. I was born after Confederation. Confederation was, of course, in April. And I was born on August 4th, so that would have been 5 months
Filming
after
at the
Confederation.
NFB. That must be at NFB itself. Did he say he was born in 49? That's what I thought I heard.
Well, Newfoundland's a very old place. We were our own country from the 1400s right up till 1949.
Sounds like Greg Malone.
It was always very
It is
cosmopolitan.
Greg
You always
Malone.
had boats coming in from all over the world, so you never got that small city feeling. It was always very much connected to the whole world. Of course, we were our own country up till 1933 when the British came in and unceremoniously stripped us of our democracy.
Of our Dominion title.
Britain wanted Newfoundland for the air race. They wanted
We
to
had a
establish air
Dominion
supremacy in the
status
North
all our
Atlantic
own.
route, and they needed Newfoundland to
I was getting into the whole Keats, or not Keats, Jesus Christ, the Locke, man, John Locke. I was getting into Locke's idea of Dominion just the other day. Well, that's what he's talking about. It's not democracy, it's dominionship. We were our own republic, so to speak.
do it, and that's why they decided to come in and take over. So they knew Newfoundland was central to aviation, and if they wanted to control the air routes of North America.
We didn't only have responsible government as a dominion, we had representative responsible government with in a pseudo republican nature.
America and the North Atlantic, they would have to control Newfoundland. And of course, this is what Roosevelt wanted anyway. Roosevelt and Churchill had made their deal that Newfoundland would not be allowed to be independent after the war. They couldn't
the
risk it,
Atlantic
have to go
Conference
with
he's talking about.
either the States
Atlantic
or Britain
Conference.
or Canada. So then Britain has to work it out in some kind of democratic process. So they set up a national convention of elected Newfoundlanders to decide what kind of government you want, but it has no power.
Mr. Chairman, I move the following resolution. Be it resolved that the National Convention desires to recommend to His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom that the following form of government be placed before the people of Newfoundland. Namely, confederation with Canada upon the basis submitted to the National Convention.
Mr. Smallwood, who's speaking, becomes the premier afterward.
Britain, in spite of many factions that wanted to hang on to Newfoundland, decided they had to get rid of it. So then the British conduct this. They give Joey as much time as possible to sell Confederation to the people. It was right down the middle, and the British nudged it over. But the official version is that Confederation won by a narrow margin, and that was, you know what, no recount, no poll count. Very shabbily done.
That's
very
a
shabbily
friggin' nice
done.
picture
And
there.
we
Oh
lost
my god, oh 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 my
right to
god. I want to go back just a little bit. Can I back nudge that with my mouse? Oh, I can. Oh. Look.
Version is that Confederation won by a narrow margin.
This is called Fort Amherst. Fort Amherst still stands, but it isn't as well staffed or maintained today. There were guns right here. See them? Let me use the highlighter. Oh, let me do this first. Here's the highlighter version of this. Here's the guns. See them? This is circa 1940s. There are concrete emplacements along here. They're still in place. The guns are long gone. This is called Fort Amherst. I almost got it all. Great.
That was, no recount, no poll count. Very shabbily done. Very shabbily done. And we lost our democracy and our right to negotiate terms. Everything was gone. We never negotiated terms with Canada. Britain did that. It was all
because we were under
fraud,
commission of government at the time, we had no actual responsible say in the matter.
I don't think so. I don't think we were. I think we were certainly encouraged to go a certain way. But no, I don't think it was a rigged vote. I think Newfoundlanders voted the way they voted. It turned out the way it turned out. But you know, I got a feeling the whole issue of conspiracy will exist forever. You know, it'll always be interesting, but it will also always be irrelevant.
I do
Easy for you to say.
that, you know, there's lots of benefits of us joining Canada, but I got to tell you, I think Canada got the best of the deal.
Whoa! Thanks, Denny.
After Newfoundland very narrowly gave up its independence and joined with Canada, came the first what was called baby bonus checks, came the first pension checks, came the first security checks from the federal government in Ottawa.
Roads.
People in this province believe they came directly from Joe Smallwood. He signed them himself, is what they thought. So he went from being marginally popular.
He's got it right there.
To being undefeatable for 20-some-odd years.
He's got it
If I
fucking
could
right
get the
there.
devil himself, if I could get Uncle Lucifer, if I could get the devil to come and start and employ 1,000 men at good wages, come on in. Come on in.
Thanks.
We came
Joey.
into Confederation, and we came in with money in the bank. We came in with, you know, probably one of the best fisheries in the entire world. You know, we brought in the hydropower. The Churchill was there. People were aware of it. So, you know, we came with some pretty lucrative assets into Confederation. So it was obviously in Canada's best interest to have control of these assets.
$600 million on that shovel. Now we're going to put one more on it.
That's how much they spent?
It won't be silver, it'll be gold. And it'll stand for $800 million. And that will be the Churchill project. And so now we turn this remarkable, this amazing sod,
4/5
this
of
very
a
unusual
billion? That's what he said?
The development that was done in the late 60s, which is the Upper Churchill, unfortunately was very, very inequitable. It was very unbalanced. It was probably the biggest giveaway of all time that we've ever had in the province, and ever will. And we did a bad deal. If we had gotten our fair share of that deal back in the late 60s and early 70s, we would have been a have province a long, long time ago, and we never would have looked back.
This
I'm proud
power.
to say that I never once said anything negative about.
I'm going to interrupt Mr. Danny Williams here. This power from the Churchill Falls development, I've seen this in action.
We would have been a have province.
Been down underneath this thing too. Underneath, you got to go down basically a mine shaft to get underneath this thing. And down under. Anyhow, the power that comes out of this goes down the eastern seaboard of North America. It does quite a lot of power.
A long, long time ago, and we never would have looked back. I'm proud to say that I never once said anything negative about Premier Smallwood or what he did during the period of time when he was in office, because my feeling on that personally was, you know, it's very difficult to judge people. You know, if you're not there in their shoes,
bygones be bygones.
and if they're not across from you and able to argue their case.
Danny was a lawyer. Might as well say it now.
Grade 4.
He's a QC. I think he's the youngest QC.
I guess encounter with the Christian Brothers as
Ever?
teachers, and tough disciplinarians, but wonderful teachers.
Christian
In this
Brothers.
classroom with people like Greg Malone and Andy Jones.
No, Sir Lawrence. I'm a Newfoundlander, no?
Well, I'll be damned. Was educated by the Christian Brothers? Is that what he just said? Well, was educated by the Christian Brothers after being educated by the Christian Brothers. There was a huge scandal involving this organization. He became ever.
I'm a Newfoundland.
The Christian Brothers was my first, I guess, encounter with the Christian Brothers as teachers.
Oh, was he in Mount Castle before it got torn down? No, that couldn't have been.
Teachers and tough disciplinarians, but wonderful teachers. I was in this classroom with people like Greg Malone and Andy Jones.
No, Sir Lawrence. Huh? I'm a Newfoundlander, no? I'm a Newfoundlander. Break it up, pieces. I'm a Newfoundlander. I'm a Newfoundlander.
This is Greg in the day.
Look.
I can remember Brother Clancy attempting to slap.
He looks like Styx, except for the hair, right? He's got Styx down here.
Look.
I can remember Brother Clancy attempting to slap everyone's face in the class. Like he ran down the corridor, sort of course, eventually some people realized what was happening, so they got out of the way, but he tried to get everyone's face. I remember that really well.
You went there in grade 1 and you were looking at guys in grade 12 or men, like, you know what I mean? And the bands playing and the drama clubs and the hockey team and the basketball team. There was a lot going on. And it was all run by the Irish Christian Brothers with an iron fist. We were close to the old brutal days, but it was not quite as brutal. It was a little more civilized.
Every part of his body which had offended the Lord burst into flames and burned for eternity. Good afternoon, boys and girls.
I think there was a lot of all of our class experienced a lot of unresolved rage, unresolved feelings from that period. I know I do, and I know Andy Jones does, and I presume Danny does. I know he's got a lot of rage in him from somewhere. A lot of fight, let's say.
My father went here, and that's why, you know, he put me here in grade 4. There was only 1 year when I was at St. Bon's when I didn't receive the strap on several occasions, but that's the way it was in those days.
Because in those days, everyone was, graded, so you knew where you stood, like you were 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 25th, or 38th, or whatever. And Danny was, I think, pretty well always #1 at St. Bon's.
Well, give the man his due.
Come in. Hello. My name is Teresita.
Hi, Teresita. Nice to meet you, finally.
Gracious.
The father used to take him down. He was probably about 3 or 4. The father used to take him down to skating, take him out by the hand.
This is a dramatic reconstruction, obviously, over here.
Hockey games.
Interesting choice.
And when he'd get into a fight with a fella, I'd be up there screeching. Give it to him, Daddy. Give it. When Danny was young, you could get live-in help to come, stay. From the outports, the girls would come in. So this girl, Marion Lee was her name, she came in from St. Mary's. And she just adored Danny. She reared him for me. So she was doing everything for him. And I said, well, I may as well get moving. The politics started, and that was it. That was a godsend for me. I loved it, loved it. The BCs had no money to pay anybody. We got by on pennies, but we had a barrel of fun.
Mom actually campaigned, went door to door, and was a campaign manager for many significant ministers, federal and provincial, in many elections. She was a take-charge kind of woman, and still is to this day.
Organized, see?
Her maiden name was Galway. Her and her sisters were fairly well known in the city as dancing instructors. I was around her quite a bit and spent a fair bit of time with her and her sisters, and then also really cut my eye teeth in politics because that was a big part of our house. My father was more of a quieter man, but yet As a lawyer, he was a very strong advocate. He was extremely good in the courtroom. There's many times I can remember, instead of taking a cash payment for his services, there'd be a box of partridge or a box of rabbits would show up at the house or at the office.
Wow.
I remember going out and cleaning the blood off the carpet because it was left and just deposited there. But I was fortunate because I got a chance to actually sit in the courtroom and watch my father cross-examine the Mounties. I'd see him, I'd see how he conducted himself, I'd see how he handled the cases. So at a very early age, I learned the strategy of doing it. But he was very competitive, and he was a competitive tennis player. He was in the Hall of Fame, an all Newfoundland athlete in tennis. So I think I picked up that competitive side from my father. There's about 7.5 years between myself and my brother Ed. Then came Nancy, and then came Tommy. So then they had the 4 children, and that was it. I was conceived before Confederation, so perhaps if they knew we weren't going to, we were going to join Canada, they probably wouldn't have had me in the first place, and I may not be here today.
First year of Canada. These are the same generation as my parents.
Well, it's a huge night for me, I must say. Having come out of politics, this is the first new private sector venture that I've gotten back in since I've gotten out of politics. And I love hockey, and to have the opportunity to be operating your own NHL franchise. I mean, I'm actually, the Winnipeg Jets actually own the franchise, but I'm actually operating it on a lease over the course of the next 4 years. So, that's a special privilege and an honor and a lot of fun. Well, you got the gift of gab there tonight. The game will be over, for God's sake, by the time we get in. How are you doing?
Not bad.
Where's 22, Frank? That's where I am this year.
22 is over here.
Okay. Quick look at my notes now for going to be at the reception.
Newfoundland, Canada's happy province.
That must have been where they got the idea. Oh, but it's not just an idea. It's a reality.
Yes, girl, we're a very happy people. Maybe we don't have some of the advantages that some of your richer provinces got. Alberta, Ontario, and the like. But our happiness, boys, are the more intangible sort. You can't actually touch it like the food and the clothing. You can't really touch it.
Yeah, that's true.
Early on, for some reason or other, we had the knowledge that it was important to be able to make fun of ourselves, to put ourselves equally with everybody else. In other words, it was equal opportunity mockery. I think Mary Walsh called it that, right? You know what I mean? It's like, and you say, well, you can't make fun of Native people. You say, well, what? Is there something wrong with them? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, of course you can make fun of everybody.
Strangely, Mary Walsh is the one who ended up developing a long-term character that was based on a native interpretation, like a native character, a character that was native, proper Labradorian. Funny. That's kind of what he's pointing out, I guess.
We needed to have a sense of ourselves if we were going to be strong in going up against Canada as a tiny, tiny, tiny place in this big, big country. Where
you really want to see what makes me tick. I noticed the hill here because I know the region well enough. Where am I looking down? There's the banks and such. No, we're looking down Gower Street. Oh, wow. New Gower, yeah, here's Queens, it's Queens Road, this is called. Here's Queens Road Convenience.
we needed to have a sense of ourselves if we were going to be strong in going up against Canada as a tiny, tiny, tiny place in this big, big country. And Quebec had that sense. I do remember when, in the early Codco days, that my mother would always she had her round of reviewers that she would phone and find out what the reaction was to the early Codco shows. And Mrs. Williams was one of them. She was one of the Galway sisters. In fact, all the Galway sisters, I think, had, they filtered their comments through her, and so Mom would report, this is what the Galway sister thought about the show, right? As my mother used to say, it's like, I don't mind a bit of dirt, but for God's sake, don't make fun of the Pope.
As we went through the 70s and we started to see what was happening and, what we were really, getting from Canada and what Canada was taking from us, I think it became quite apparent that we weren't getting a really fair shake. Instead of being sort of, moderate Tories, we became very, very strong Conservatives. And were, I guess, dedicated at that point in time to seeing that the Smallwood government was eventually replaced.
Frank Moore. Weeping in the fucking houses.
I used to teach dancing before.
Dramatic reconstruction.
Before I got married.
Hmm.
Well, we
Dramatic
were in
reconstruction.
the cellar for so
I'm
long.
gonna write that across the
big
top of this
seats.
sooner or later.
And when Frank got elected, we all went up to the Premier's office. I said, I'm dancing on
Fine.
top of that desk. And all right, all the crowd, okay, on, they put me up. And I
That's not the power structure, I see. Infrastructure for the win. Yeah, what we might as well.
Oh, what? Got some company in this.
Well, at least now he's
Hockey's been a big
at
part
least
of our
wearing the
life.
hockey gear.
Big part of it. Lombardi said, you know, winning isn't everything, but wanting to win is. And there's such a lot of truth in it. You know, you need to want to win. You need to want to achieve. You fall just short, that's fine. But as long as there's a good, hard effort, and of course, you know, those are the kind of lessons that hockey taught me. It also taught you how to lose.
Pretty bad when the hard part of the game is lacing up your skates. There we go.
He was wearing the local team's colors, name, the like.
And even through
ice caps,
business and through the legal side, you know, a lot of people, that whole hockey fraternity is a big group of people and very, very tightly knit.
Where's Eddie? Where's Eddie? You get that
Place to compete, a market, if you will.
I
But,
knew Danny when he had relatively modest.
I got this. Oh yeah, he's partner, a law partner. This man. Before we get into Steve Marshall, Danny plays more than one sport. His father played tennis. He plays hockey, and Danny owns a lot of golf courses. And during his years as premier, he had a business department, which was probably it was probably the department that saved the most money by not having offices and tables and desks and computers and filing cabinets and the like. No. It conducted its businesses by doing business on a golf course.
Means, you know, he didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth. He was a young man of 25 or 26 when we met. He called me and asked me would I come to try out in the fall for a junior team he was putting together.
Oh, this fun. From teammate to
Frank, let's go.
partner. That's pretty neat.
Thankfully, I made the team, and that's where I met Danny. I got to know him pretty well.
Nice work, man. Nice fucking work, man.
The Rhodes Scholarship was actually introduced to me by my father. You know, I had no intention of applying for the Rhodes Scholarship. He basically did all the work, put it all together, prepared the application, and said, sign it, here it is. Now, at the time, you know, I was 19.
Did I not say?
A horrific experience for me. Because I was used to home, liked home, and then when all of a sudden I was on my own in this place that I really had no interest in going to in the first place. Once I got adjusted, I got some good friends in England, and I got sort of used to the English culture a bit, and I enjoyed that part of it. And of course, those were great days in England, though. Those were the 69, 70, 71 days of the Beatles, Carnaby Street, you know, all the great music, miniskirts, you know, fashion, everything was going on in England. I used to get barristers' gowns made. There was a robe maker on Broad Street in Oxford who made gowns, and I went down to see him because I knew from my father that in Newfoundland there might have been a dozen lawyers.
Oxford is where John Locke, yeah.
Who had gowns, and all the rest of them used to borrow gowns from the other lawyers. What I would do was I'd get a half dozen robes made in England, and I could sell them for 100 or 150 bucks. And so That was the way I managed to pay for my airfare back and forth by bringing a gown. So I probably pretty well robed the entire legal profession while I was at Oxford.
Youngest Queen's Counsel ever, I contend.
I came back after that year and I married Maureen. And then immediately left within a week and headed off to Halifax.
Halifax, huh?
And went to Dalhousie to do a Canadian law degree.
Right. So Dal graduate too. That's neat.
And of course had the old station wagon with everything in the world that we owned in that station wagon. Shortly after that, I just headed on back home, and then it was all about, you know, getting a house or an apartment. It was an apartment at that time. And then moved into practice with my father and his partner. Then when I got back and finished in 72, and of course our first daughter, Gillian, was born in 73.
My parents bred Old English sheepdogs. I always grew up with dogs around the house. We always had big dogs. Mom used to say, you know, Danny, we need a new dishwasher. And he'd say, okay, well, let's breed Casey, and that was their female dog. And they'd breed her, and sure enough, they'd get their dishwasher. And then they did the same thing for a fridge. And I think a washer and dryer. We didn't have a lot of things, but, you know, we had clothes, we had food, we had, you know, all the things that, you know, love, lots of love.
And then it was in 74, that following year, that I was contacted. He said, look, you know, we're going to apply for a cable license in St. John's, or we'd like to, and we'd like to get someone to get a group together, but we're behind the 8 ball, and we need to move really fast. So
He ended up controlling the cable networks across Newfoundland. He consolidated them before there was an issue. Went from town to town. Set up satellite dishes to relay stuff. Set up a community television. Well, I didn't even set up a community television. Left it in control of a local in each of the different communities. And let it sort itself out until finally selling it to Rogers.
my first response was, what's a cable license? I had no idea what cable television was, and you know, I knew it was a challenge, but I also knew
I didn't
that
see
it
cable
was a
until
rewarding
1989.
business proposition if you could make it work. I think if there was 10% of the company that was available to me as a founder, so in order to get that 10%, I had to borrow $5,000.
I did see cable before 1989. I did. I saw it in the early 1980s, but not where I was living. That was down the road.
Just bought a house and had sort of, you know, gone out and bored to the hilt, you know, to get that house. The house was $30,000. I just went to my father and said, you want a piece of the action here? We're going to try this. If you want to come in for $2,500, we'll split the shares down the middle. And I remember on Christmas Eve in 1975, I'll never forget it, I'd gone down to the store. I'd gone to actually Canadian Tire, which was my favorite store and probably still is in those days, where I go down and pick up whatever we need, and it was around Christmas time, so obviously it was extension cords and paper and everything else I was getting. And I remember coming back to the house, and Maureen said, you got the license? And I thought it was my car license. I said, oh, great, this good. No. She said, you got the cable license. And I was just in shock.
Bye-bye, sideburns. Hey, I should have another beer.
There was a point where I realized father and son can't work together forever, and I decided I'm going to have to leave him and his firm.
Always at work.
Probably one of the toughest decisions that I've made my entire life, to be quite frank. I wanted to be able to, you know, grow the practice. I also wanted to be involved, you know, in some, you know, other business dealings, and of course, obviously expand my interest in the cable company. And the firm was Williams & Williams, and I was leaving. The problem is, you know, when you're working for family or working with your father, you're always the son, you're not the partner. You know, I'm being stifled a little bit. Not that it was from any will, because it wasn't. He was a wonderful man, and
You're always the son, you're not the partner. Interesting distinction Mr. Williams makes. I grant him that. I do grant him that much. Anyone happens to be watching this is a rebroadcast of a National Film Board documentary on a politician who is since retired from my jurisdiction. This is my state level representative of choice at least once in this cycle. And I had 3 opportunities to vote for him.
And a great law partner from that perspective, but I was still his son, and I had bigger things to do. But by the same token, I still know that I was his eldest. I was in practice with him. I knew that any attempt by me to move out was going to be difficult. We occupied a former church over on Logie Bay Road, and I remember as I walked out the door that day, he was at the top of the stairs. And I remember looking back at him, and tears were coming down my cheeks. He wasn't going to cry because he was too proud a man for that, and I respected him for that. But I knew it had to be tearing his heart out because it was tearing mine out when I did it.
So yeah.
I've always thought I've had kind of David and Goliath syndrome, it's just because I've always been a fighter, even though I don't consider myself tough in a physical sense of the way, because I'm not a big man, but even when I played hockey and I played, junior hockey and that, I was always in trouble. Never could back down from a fight, never could back down from the bully, never could back down from somebody who was trying to push somebody else around, whether it happened to be me or somebody else. And maybe it came from being that little guy who got the smack in the face a long time ago, and nobody came to help him out, and kind of thought, okay, that's enough of that. That's not going to happen again.
It was probably around Christmas time in my 3rd year of law school, and the phone rang in my apartment, and it was Danny Williams on the phone. And I hadn't spoken with him in a while. And he said, look, I've left my dad's firm. I've started another firm. I'd like for you to consider joining us.
He's on this steps in the Supreme Court downtown.
Walked through the door. It wasn't 5 minutes later, the phone rang, and he said, here you go, here's your first client. So we've been together ever since. Well, Danny's been acting for the little guy and the little girl from day one. His practice was never big corporate clients. I do know that in those days, in a lot of cases, there would be no fee charged if there was no ability to pay it.
My God, he was Perry Mason, he was Matlock. He was brilliant as a jurist, as a lawyer.
I think after about a decade of practicing law, I felt I was ready to start to do some heavier criminal work. Lawyers had said to me, you haven't practiced law until you've done a jury trial, and it's very true. That experience before a jury for me was the ultimate in a legal experience, because not only are you dealing with a judge on matters of law, you're dealing with 12 of your peers, men and women, who are standing back and making an independent assessment of the facts coupled with the interpretation of the law. And it's a fascinating experience because, as I'm speaking to you, you speak to a jury.
Danny's mantra was work harder, work harder, work harder. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And, outwork them. And, here's 2 guys against a police force.
I ain't gonna say anything bad about him here.
There's good and bad everything. There's good doctors and bad doctors, and good lawyers and bad lawyers, and good politicians and bad politicians, and there's good priests, and there's bad priests, and there's good brothers, and there's bad brothers. Well, originally, the Mount Cashel case came to the office in the early 90s. At that time, Jack Harris was lead on the file. This abuse on these young males at the time was...
Jack Harris, I don't know if he was working for Danny then or working with Danny then. He also became a politician, a New Democrat.
Horrific. They were prisoners, and they were being abused by the people who were their masters. So what I did was sat down through the profiles and took what I felt was probably the most serious case from a perspective of taking it to court. And this was a chap by the name of Jerry Brinston. And basically, I might have some of the facts wrong, but I recollect that 3 or 4, he and his sister, were orphaned. I think his father died, then his mother died. Then he went to the orphanage. He was abused at the orphanage. She was abused by several of the brothers there. Then on the weekends, he was being abused by some of the priests who were visiting the orphanage. He was then sent off sometimes to Halifax for weekends, where he was a victim of abuse there with some of the clergy in Halifax. He ultimately went on the streets at about 15 as a male prostitute and developed HIV. And so it was a sad, sad, sad story. I remember one individual who'll go unnamed who had a call from his lawyer who said, you know, he's been subpoenaed for Monday. He's home, he's bedridden, he can't come to court. Well, I said, I'll bring him in on a bloody stretcher because he's coming to court. And so you better find a way, or you better have some good medical evidence why he can't show up. I remember that weekend the Santa Claus parade was on, so it would have been around November, December. I had been negotiating with the provincial government at the time and had basically said to Premier's officials who were the Department of Justice, look, you know, this needs to be settled. This is a black mark on the history of the province. It's a black mark for everybody here. It needs to be brought to closure. Let's get it settled. And, you know, full points to the government of that day, they settled on the eve of the trial. That was a significant piece of closure for all of them, and something that we were very proud to do, but it was a very difficult piece of work.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, boy.
You got your here's all I'm nice.
God almighty, I'm telling you, they're a great bunch.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
I didn't encourage him. I never really did encourage him to go into politics. Never did, because I know, you know, I saw too much heartbreak through the years over it, you know, and no, but he had his mindset. That was it.
Spice expands consciousness.
So I went to the family. And the majority of the family were on sides. The main one, of course, at that point was Maureen. And if Maureen said, yeah, go for it, fine. So Maureen had said yes.
I remember always saying to him, you know, Dad, if it's in your blood, it was in your mother's blood, it's in your blood. And if it's something that you want to do, I think that you should do it. Because if you don't, you're never, ever going to forgive yourself for it.
And then I went off for kind of just a soul-searching mission, just to say, like, you know, do I really want to do this? I'm 50, practiced law for 30 years. You know, I've made my dollar. I managed to get the cable company sold for between $230 and $250 million. And I can just say off the sunset and live happily ever after. And then I kind of went through a realization that, look, you know, if I don't do this, you know, I could look back in 10 years' time, which is really now, and say, you know,
what about that tattoo, Danny?
I saw that we were so resource rich. Somebody was always coming in and just cherry picking us and just taking it away. So I said, no, I'm going in with an attitude of no more giveaways, and that was the mantra. But it was exactly how I felt, and I feel that way to this day.
To the best of my knowledge and ability.
Execute the office of the leader of the Newfoundland and Labrador Progressive Conservative Party.
Execute the office of the leader of the Newfoundland and Labrador Progressive Conservative Party.
And that I will uphold the Constitution.
And that I will uphold the Constitution.
And bylaws that govern the conduct of our party.
Party rally,
and bylaws that govern the conduct of our party.
She's yours, buddy.
Thank you.
Right on.
She's yours, buddy.
Right on. This fellow right here. He's it. Come in, Maureen.
His name was Ed Byrne.
And let me tell you one more time, Roger Grimes. Let's lace up the skates, buddy, and let's have a general election, because you're going down.
Owned the cable company. He'd sold it by that time. He had to sell his stake to Rogers, as I mentioned. He maintained, however, a more than adequate business relationship with the man who was on the left end of the spectrum, against him, so to speak. When he talks to Roger Grimes, who he's really saying is, I'll deal this with another man who's working with Rogers, who is a liberal. Who's a buddy of his, and that's enough of that.
hello to my little friend. Danny got elected.
And how old were you then?
Oh, too old. I should have had more sense.
Yeah, I haven't cracked a
Walking into
smile
the
since.
Premier's office as Premier was a really different experience. All of a sudden, you know, you're 8 floors up, you look out over.
Province's legislature building is right over here. I'll indicate it with an arrow. Oh, sorry, it's right there.
The city of St. John's. You think, holy shit, I now have taken over this job. It's a big responsibility, and even more importantly, there's over 500,000 people who are totally relying on my judgment.
We all had different
Downtown.
roles. Brian was chief of staff, I was communications. You know, we had
South
titles.
looking north.
Steve was deputy chief of staff. He always involved us in all facets of running the office.
From my point of view, the hardest part of this job was briefing him. Have you ever briefed a brilliant man? It's tough. It's tough to do. The one question he asks you after giving that full detailed briefing is the one answer you don't have.
You know what I think, dude? Depends. If you're gonna brief, never mind. Long joke. And I'm gonna take a quick break. You can't see shit with all of this stuff, though. Hey, do I got a special? I do, too. Toggle visibility. I'm gonna take a quick break. Won't be long. Okie doke. I have returned. Before I resume, I'm going to quickly check my phone. Curious. I shall reply to that later. Speaking of later, I hereby announce my intention to consume an alcoholic beverage while watching the rest of this documentary. Sorry, quote, documentary, unquote. I've noticed there's been a significant portion of the proceedings which have been dramatic reconstructions. This is why I say things like that. If it's a documentary or not, that's a question for Leni Riefenstahl. Here's where we were with the notes. See, I got this all figured out now.
The province had gone through some difficult times, and in the early 90s, you obviously had the cod moratorium, and I think if I remember correctly, some 50,000 Newfoundlanders basically were out of jobs during that process.
You and your people took it. No, I'm trying to.
You're
doing shit on it. 6 generations down the line, passed down, and he's done nothing but shit to us.
And with that, fishermen stormed the doors of John Crosby's news conference.
Hello,
so
Crosby.
This had a huge impact on a population of about 500,000 people. There was significant outmigration. The economy was in decline.
The outmigration
there was
occurred before the
significant
fishery
disparity
collapse.
in our economics. We were struggling.
It began occurring.
Immediately when I got in there, within months, I had to make some really tough decisions.
You just started in the office, so you're full of enthusiasm and optimism and great ideas. And before you can start to implement anything, all of a sudden you're just faced with this report.
So we had to announce a wage sector freeze, within months of my election.
Now, I have never said this in public before, but I'm saying it now. That Danny Williams lied. He lied to the Labour movement on several occasions.
I remember in the office during that whole period, looking out down onto the parking lot in front of the Confederation building.
The angry protesters.
Seeing at times 10,000 people standing up, looking up, some of them, a lot of them shaking their fists.
I actually have to raise a point of contention with you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, I do believe at this time it became illegal to protest inside the fucking house. I mean, you can't get right into the legislature chambers without going through an antechamber on the outside where there's a security desk and the like, and stairwells and elevators and hallways to other departments. This main lobby used to be accessible to the public, and then there came a rule saying we weren't allowed to protest inside anymore. We had to stay outside. Then tens of thousands of people started showing up.
For being in that office, in the background I had a music playing, which was Tom Petty, which was Don't Back Down. Kept playing constantly. I liked the sound of it, I liked the message, and it just kept me motivated that I had to stay the course.
Hockey Premier all the way.
Not because I wanted to be a hard ass, but because I had to make some tough decisions in order to get this province to start to swing around.
It's fair to say the first year and a half to 2 years that Danny was in power, they were not good years for Danny Williams.
Everybody kind of got a shock. And didn't realize, well, this is not how I envisioned being in government. And we'd had to, find ways to get into the Confederation building to go to work every day because they had the place barricaded, essentially. It wasn't fun.
Blocked up. See, boy.
It wasn't
Blocked
fun at all.
up.
And remember, everything was new. We hadn't been in government at that point, so it was all learnings.
You guys were young, right? I mean, you're young now. This was how many years ago?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. So, you were young to be dealing with such heavy-duty stuff.
What?
I was under 30.
What? You were under 30.
That was unnecessary and uncalled for.
Uncalled for, yeah. A dirty lie.
It's one thing for us as staff to have those feelings like, geez, we're into a pretty different time. Don't envision when we first take office and come up with a large majority government.
Confederation
we're going to
building,
take this province by storm, and hang on a second, I got my next door neighbour on strike because of what I'm doing here.
I was never internally governed by the fact that I just got to get elected again. I just got to get elected the next time.
Okay.
That was kind of the way I approached things. Sometimes you can compromise, because if you're going to try and get to the ultimate goal, you have to stay a tough course to get there, and then hopefully it's better for everybody at the end of the day.
You know, at least in the front nine, right? At least in the front nine. Excuse me, there's a good beer. Another alternative title up here.
We had to roll into dealing with the problem at hand, which was those sustained deficits, and that was, I mean, that was brutal. Some of the things that were looked at, you know, it was literally everything from funding for false teeth for low-income people to healthcare, to hospital closures. You know, the full gamut was on the table.
We need to see where the major sources of revenue are, and our major sources of revenue are the federal government, which would be, you know, transfer payments, which is one, but I was trying to move us away from that. Again, it comes back to the fact that when we joined Confederation, you know, our bountiful resources, most of them are offshore.
History, I think, will record that Danny struck in politics at the same time somebody yelled, oil.
Practically speaking, true. Thing is...
And the interesting thing, I think, that you know, people didn't really get and people didn't understand.
Because it started in the 1980s. It took all of the 1990s, so the Mount Cashel thing was great, keep the government on its toes, so to speak, material. He runs for politics at 2000s, and when the oil development is really kicking into gear, carries it through into 2010 when he retires.
In Canada, with regard to our offshore resources, our fishery, our oil and gas, is that every other province in the country has full control of their resources and full benefit from the resources, like Alberta, for example. But because ours is offshore and it's underwater, the federal government has control of those resources, which is really, you know, inequitable and unfair.
Oy.
So that's why over the years we've had such issues with our fishery, because the people who actually control the fishery are the federal government.
Damn bloody feds, love. This is the old provincial legislature building. I generally point that out in video.
Well, in the beginning, I didn't know.
The last video I did of a walkabout, or last video clips I showed of a walkabout downtown, that's one of the videos one of the angles I got, this one. So that's the Colonial building. It's on, what's it called? Military Road.
Well, in the beginning, I didn't know Paul Martin very well. I knew about him. You know, I had read
Prime
about
Minister
him.
at the time.
I knew his reputation. You know, I admired him for what he'd accomplished, you know, for the country as a finance minister in the Chrétien government. You know, it appeared very clear to me that Paul Martin was a major factor in turning the economy around. I felt he knew what he was doing, and I liked that.
Oh,
and then
man.
during the election campaign.
Shit. See, look. Oh, what a frame. What a frame.
You know, it appeared very clear to me that Paul Martin...
Hang on a second. Yeah, it won't matter if I hit space or not here, of course not. Damn.
Was a major factor in
Yeah, I can't force that to pop back down when I'm
turning the
paused.
economy around. I felt he knew what he was doing, and I liked that. And then during the election campaign,
I'm thinking some imagine if kind of like meme deal where it's quite obviously bullshit. That's what I'm thinking.
Paul Martin, then as leader of the Liberal Party, came to town, indicated that you know, he was prepared to grant
three ominous
Labrador
meme factory
fair
mine
share
places
as principal beneficiary.
Prime Minister Martin made a commitment that Newfoundland and Labrador would get the full benefit of its offshore oil royalties.
He had made this commitment to us, and he made it publicly to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. Once he got in office and once he got in power, you know, obviously the responsibility of running a country like Canada is huge. And at a small scale, I know what I've got to try and do in Newfoundland and Labrador. So, you know, multiply that by 100, and that's what he's got to do. So then over the course of the next couple of months, there was some discussion back and forth. And then finally, there was an overture from the federal government that there was going to be a meeting held in Winnipeg.
If you're called by the Prime Minister's office out to the other end of the country, you feel pretty confident
closer to 1,000, I think.
There's something good's going to happen.
We thought we were going to go and seal the deal on the Atlantic Accord and equalization, and felt very confident going, you know, this is it, bring it home, give everyone a great Christmas gift, and got there and started meeting with some senior federal government folks, and it was clear after about 8 seconds that this wasn't going to happen.
I knew we were doomed when we got frozen inside the plane when we landed.
So
and they had to
I flew
get
commercial.
industrial size. They had to get industrial size hair blowers, for lack of a better term.
When I got out there, I realized immediately that John Effort was not there. He was the federal Newfoundland minister who actually happened to be the natural resources minister at the time. I thought this is
looks
going
to kill.
It's a couple of days before Christmas. They, dragged us all the way out here, and they're going to give us nothing.
Everybody was talking about this meeting in Winnipeg.
The expectations were...
Oh, through the moon.
And he felt the weight of that.
Oh, had to.
He felt the weight of those expectations from the people of the province.
We had the hopes of
I keep getting all
500,000
these
people
ideas
riding
as I'm
on a
looking at
plane
these
with us to Winnipeg.
still shots.
They were
here.
trying to set us.
I mean, the still shot pictures are kind of helping. This one is an interesting one because it's in color. But I'm thinking that I cannot avoid the actual. Oh, that one either. If looks could kill.
Newfoundland minister who actually happened to be the natural resources minister at the time. I thought, this is a sham. This is going nowhere.
Pokemon, gotta get them all. Sorry, Danny. Not really.
It's a couple of days before Christmas. They, dragged us all the way out here, and they're going to give us nothing.
Everybody was talking about this meeting in Winnipeg.
The expectations were...
Oh, through the moon.
And he felt the weight of that.
Oh, had to.
He felt the
through
weight
the moon.
of those
Through the moon.
expectations from the
Jesus,
people of the province.
pretty fucking fast,
We had
buddy.
the hopes of 500,000 people riding on a plane with us to Winnipeg. They were trying to set us up. It was a jam. They were trying to give us less than what we were promised by the Prime Minister of the country.
It was a
They're
jam?
not treating us as a true
Stephen Harper
equal
on
member in this
piano,
thing.
that's what was going to be.
Then we got a problem.
It was then on the way back on the plane that I decided that we had to really do something dramatic. To tell
We had to do something dramatic.
Ottawa and to tell Canada that we were being shafted here. And so I decided at that point, on the way back on the plane,
Shaftola.
contrary to the advice of everybody who was around me, was saying, don't do this.
He said, we're going to take down the flags. I'm going to take down the Canadian flag. The people of the country need to understand how serious, because it was a big deal.
I'm not lowering the flags, I'm removing the flags. We have decades of disappointments by this government. They've turned their back on us. They have slighted us. These are our resources. This is a deal and a commitment that was made by the Prime Minister of Canada to this province.
I ask you, brethren, sisterin, motherin and fatherin, anybody in, listen, isn't not his argument the same as what this airspace rights thing? I tell you.
It's money, it's not a Christmas gift, it's something that we're entitled to.
Newfoundland and Labrador has, I think we comprise 10% of the armed forces in Canada. So there's
Quite a high fraction, yes,
sons
indeed.
and daughters and husbands
Yeah,
and
that's right.
wives and moms and dads in the military, and you wondered what their reaction was going to be. So I was quite concerned. And continue to be concerned during the news conference when that flag's coming down.
Let's go back here. This is called The Fighting Newfoundlander, and the pose is taken from the First World War.
What their reaction was going to be. So I was quite concerned, and continue to be concerned during the news conference when that flag's coming down. That flag.
After this is over, that flag will be gone, that flag will be gone.
That one will be gone.
That flag will be gone. We had an agreement with the Government of Canada by the Prime Minister of the country.
Like in the deal!
If he is not honouring his promise and his commitment,
Another title,
then
another
he
title.
represents the Government of Canada.
So when he sat in the Confederation building and he pointed and said, I'm taking that flag down, and that one down, and that one down, and that one's coming down, he knew that's the clip. He knew that's
Like
the
in
clip.
the deal!
He knew that's what they're going to see in BC. That's what they're going to see. That's what we're going to see in Quebec, in Toronto. That's what we're going to see in Manitoba, in Alberta. And do you know what the people of Canada said about that? Now, there's my kind of guy. Right? And all of a sudden, he's the most popular premier in 8 of the 10 provinces in Canada. How did that happen? Well, Paul Martin had to deal with that. Oh, yeah, it was brilliant.
You never guess who he took on next. You'll never guess who he took on next. Guess who he took on next. Guess who he took on next. If you're not watching the stream already, if you're not participating live, as it were, I have to pop your cherry. He takes on Paul McCartney. Takes on Paul McCartney next.
We went on a tour basically to tell our story. Left, I think, day after, either Boxing Day or the day after, and went to Toronto and went to the Globe and went to the Post and went to CBC and went to CTV and went to all the nationals, and laid out exactly why we were disgruntled, why we were unhappy.
The province was supporting him on this too. I mean, it was everywhere.
Pink, white, and green is a Republican
this,
flag.
We're finally getting our dues. Good for you, Danny. And going through the airports, people would talk. Stick to your guns. We're owed this. There's so much passion on it.
I remember, making calls to the Prime Minister's office and not getting them returned. In good times, the Prime Minister referred to me as Danny, and I would refer to him as Prime Minister, but he would say, call me Paul if we're in a private meeting. He was quite a gentleman. But latter stages, when the phone rang and I asked for a conversation with him, I know that internally the office referred to me as the asshole from Newfoundland. So things had deteriorated significantly.
I don't think anyone will
Find distinction to hold, my friend. Find distinction to hold.
And not just, the federal bureaucrats as well. I mean, everybody put a lot of time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears into that. But he was determined to make it happen, and there were many times we wondered
what goes
whether or not it would.
Prime Minister was smoking that too.
Oh, he was, yeah. They had a little gathering afterwards, I think privately, to clear the air on some of the things that went on during the whole thing.
Eventually, during that January period, we managed to get a dialogue going between both sides, and a meeting was set up for Ottawa. I asked at that time to the senior official who we were negotiating with if I could have just a moment with the Prime Minister. Not a chance, he doesn't even want to go to this meeting. It'd be better probably if you didn't, because it might only harm the negotiation. I said, look, I just need a meeting with him. I just want to be able to sit down and put one question to him. So anyway, I was brought into this room with these huge 20, 30-foot doors. And eventually, after what seemed an eternity, he walked into the room and he opened up the door. And he said, Premier, and it was, like I said before, we were on a first-name basis. He said, Premier, and I said, Prime Minister. He said, you have a question for me? And I said, yes, Prime Minister, I do. And he said, what is it? I said, I know that you would like to tell me to go blank myself. I won't say the word, but I know you'd like to tell me to go blank myself. And he just kind of looked at me, and a smile broke on his face, and he said, you're exactly right.
And I think ultimately, unlike perhaps other relationships with prime ministers, after the fact, that relationship was mended. And, they had a mutual respect for each other.
We ended up coming home with a $2 billion check, which I think was not so much the significance of the amount of money, which for Newfoundland and Labrador was enormous. It was a huge amount of money. But more importantly, that rectangular piece of paper with the check, I guess, probably established a whole new sense of pride and self-esteem for Newfoundlanders.
The MHA that he was standing behind there is a liberal.
Basically fought a battle, and we had won.
It's Valentine's Day. I'd go over and give him a big hug, only I'm afraid of the debate that has started around the country.
He's a red Tory. Shit. There's his mother there, on. Yes, boy.
We got it. We got it. We got it. I gotta tell you, this is the most overwhelming feeling I've ever had in my young life. This is what it's all about. What it's all about is not about money. It's not about money at all. It's about pride and respect and dignity and self-sufficiency and making Newfoundland
$2 billion. It's like that.
Number one.
You do indeed embody what this country is all about. The great ability of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to speak to a vision that goes far beyond where they're from, to understand what in fact is the essence of nationhood, You embodied that in this negotiation, Premier Williams, and I want to say to you how proud I am.
Thanks, Paul. Dramatic reconstruction there. When did Danny go to sea? Danny was in Captain's Courageous? What? God damn, look at that. You're spy.
One of the things I was saying as a talk show host all the time was, isn't it a joy, a pleasure that the debate we're having is about how to spend our money versus the debate that for decades we'd had about how do we get some money. I want to tell you something. A politician with cash is virtually undefeatable, and that's where Danny Williams found himself. All of a sudden, he was the first premier in the history of the province with money. Now, to be honest, Joey Smallwood in his day was considered to have the money because he had Ottawa's money. Danny had real money.
Lovely.
See, you know what? You know what? I gotta call fucking bullshit on you there, Sims. You know why? Do you know why I gotta call bullshit on that one? Because there have been how many financial crashes between Smallwood's day and Danny Williams' day? Count them. One of them occurs while Danny Williams is in fucking government. 2 years later, he's gone. 2 years later, he's out of there. Psh. Fuck, I'm here. Fucking here. Where am I going to be? Gone.
None for me, thanks, no.
I never tried. I had to shut him up. I said, for God's sake, fellas, that's enough.
No.
He tried in St. John's Centre for the nomination. You really didn't want him to run.
Was that your father?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there's the world in politics, your father would have been.
Why?
She's Swedish? Jesus Christ.
He didn't have any diplomacy about
No, he's too blunt. I think that's, he wouldn't, I know what you mean. That's exactly what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
We all come by that honestly sometimes. Sometimes you got to know when to pull it back, though.
Yes, sometimes. But I think it's a mistake to pull back too often.
I agree with you.
Sorry.
Really asked
she only had 4 children. Can you imagine?
Sorry. I think he's shown.
Oh, that was horrible.
It didn't really matter what political party it was. You know, if you were on the wrong side,
he didn't care.
You were getting
He had an agenda.
He was a red Tory,
and it didn't matter to him what you were, but you were the way to get the
He's
solution.
remembered as a red Tory.
He had a lot of these. I said it earlier, but he had a lot of these big battles along the way, and they all meant, everything to the province. And some people got mowed down along the way. That's it.
Yeah. If you were on the wrong side, Freight Train Williams was coming through.
He's on a mission. He's got to get stuff done.
And
Sorry if he bowled you over.
I think during his time in office, we were the only ones who actually called him premier. Everyone else called him Danny.
Exactly.
I mean, everybody.
Practically everybody.
Everybody was.
And that's the way he wanted it.
That's the truth.
And even
too.
today, people call him Mr. Williams, and he can't stand it.
You don't like it. Okay.
People of this province have been very wise to have this man of vision, of integrity, of great leadership lead us for another 4 years. Please join with me.
Her name is Kathy Dunderdale. She became the premier of the province when Danny retired. I kid you not.
Thank you, Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you very much.
What am I drinking? Hey? You wondering? Are you wondering?
Well, first of all, I don't.
I'm drinking Rolling Rock Extra Pale, which is a registered trademark of a St. Louis, Missouri. Has a 33 on the can. I kind of like that. But it's brewed by Labatt, so it's got Canadian alcohol content. Or pretty close to it. Closer than average.
I don't wear hats very well, as you can see. I don't look very good at a baseball hat either, so a beret is not much better. Hugo Chavez was in his country basically taken government control and ownership of all assets. That's not, of course, where I was at all. At that time, you know, it was relatively unheard of in North America that
Danny Chavez,
local government, particularly provincial government in Canada, would be trying to, you know, get a bigger share of their royalties and equity as well. So I was tagged Danny Chavez, and I didn't mind that. Actually, it actually draws attention to the issue and gives you an opportunity to explain it and explain why you're doing it and why you want to have a good
He's a red Tory, I'm telling you.
At the height of the battle with the oil companies. Next up, Stephen Harper.
Next up, Paul McCartney.
A message from the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Honourable Danny Williams.
My fellow Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, good evening. Not long ago, I announced that we had become a have province. Many of you celebrated by buying stuff. Others, like me, showed restraint. For instance, this desk is merely gold-plated.
Actually, we should do that again, and I'll pick one with a slower spin time for you. Well, you know what I mean? Like, it goes like...
Mark Critch.
If I pick one closer, then it's not gonna... It works on free play or quarters, so if you... Oh, I see. I played Danny on the show before Danny was ever on. So I would do the impression of Danny, you know, you part the hair, you squint a little bit, and just no matter what it is, has to be, you get angry about it. You know, could be anything. Could be all kittens, you know. Look at these kittens out there. Newfoundland and Labrador were dogs. There's two types of dogs, Newfoundland dog, Labrador dog. There's no Newfoundland cat for a reason. Cats cannot be trusted. Cats are a French animal. They say politicians can either be villains or folk heroes. And the thing is, what the weird thing about Danny is that you have a multi-millionaire, big shot lawyer guy who's a folk hero. And he's the little guy, he's the underdog. And you just need a big enough Goliath, you know?
We all continue to marvel at the poll numbers.
Something this documentary is not talking about. I could go back in time and look it up for you if you really got curious. But if you look for some of Danny's Christmas time speeches, you'd quickly find that he throws out a lot of signals for a wide variety of groups in society, a wide variety of cultures, subculture. One such group is the Knights of Columbus.
I think envy would be the right word. And heck, this guy gets higher approval ratings from the population than I do from my own family.
Fuck off, Stephen.
Prime Minister Harper made a commitment, again, on offshore resources, I believe it was, and on changing the equalization program to allow that benefit to accrue to Newfoundland and Labrador. So we had a firm commitment in writing, and that's how it started.
And I think Brian was a party to the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
How does it... Ooh.
The project that was in my lap at the time was the Hebron project. And that was one that had been discovered.
This is Fort Amherst once more.
25 to 30 years
prior. You can see the concrete now,
but
no guns.
And nothing had happened. So the whole issue was whether this fallow field would be and should be and could be developed by the oil companies. Our infrastructure requirements in this province were absolutely enormous. And we needed many, many billions of dollars in order to do that. Well, that's why the Accord was so important. That's why there were more revenues from the oil companies were important. And that's why this commitment that Harper had made to us would have been that last chunk of cash that we needed in order to take care of this.
Welcome the Prime Minister of Canada to Gander.
Prime Minister Harper came to Gander for a convention, and of course things were very friendly.
You know, the Premier genuinely tried to make that work, you know. I don't
He
think
put the olive branch out, but it didn't last long.
Me and my chief of staff and he and his chief of staff went to a meeting in Hotel Gander in one of the rooms there, and he said, well, okay, where do you want to start? And I said, well, I'd like to start with fallow fields, because I said that's something that's current. I need to get you to step up now and and basically say that Canada is not going to stand for the oil companies, standing back.
And of course, I have, your commitment on offshore resource revenue. And the Prime Minister said, I haven't made my mind up on that yet, Danny. And it got very uncomfortable from then on, yeah.
And he turned to me and he said, well, you're not going to F up my country. And I said, oh, is that right? I moved over closer to him.
And Danny said, if you fuck with my province, I'll chase you to the ends of the fucking earth, or something.
Four corners of the earth.
Four corners, to be precise, yeah.
And I will chase you to the four corners of the earth, or the three coasts in this country, to take you down if you're not supportive of my province and the issues that are important to us. That's where
Danny.
we got off to a bad start.
And I remember looking over at the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and he was like me with his head just buried writing notes, We were walking down the hall to Elizabeth and Steve, and he said, I don't think I'm going to need speaking notes for my speech tonight.
Never a good sign.
You get that feeling in your stomach. He's off script. He's off script.
He's going rogue.
First time I met him, and his initial comments about Atlantic Canadians are a culture of defeat. I think they've represented very much what his thoughts are about Atlantic Canada and Newfoundland and Labrador. In fact, in meetings with him, he said we don't need Newfoundland to get elected. That said it all for me.
I saw him the last time he came to the province.
Started a confrontation with me.
He had an RCMP truck.
In a friendly
big ass fucking SWAT
the
truck.
First private meeting we had, that was the red rag to the bull for me, because that's the way the ground rules are going to be, buddy. I'll play by those rules if you want to, right? So.
How was your meeting?
Anything but conservative.
If Stephen Harper gets a majority government, I remind you of the words of Bachman Turner Overdrive. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Danny stands up when Harper is on the flight going back to Ottawa.
The
announces at the annual convention that this guy and his party are now persona non grata. And if he has his way, not one Conservative will be elected federally.
When that blue symbol comes up, and that Conservative symbol, and we're progressive Conservatives in this province, when that comes up, there better be a big goose egg for the Conservatives if they haven't delivered on their province right here. Who can trust the Prime Minister? Is it okay for the man occupying the highest office in our country to treat a province in the Federation with such disdain? A majority government for Stephen Harper would be one of the most negative political events in Canadian history. Vote anything but Conservative. It's as easy as A, B, C.
Yeah. Blood, sweat, and bullshit.
But while the ABC campaign worked here, it did nothing nationally. Stephen Harper has a stronger minority than when the election began.
Started turning. Harper
Reminds
held
me
on
something
for
very
longer
interesting that
than
Don Jamieson
Williams
said,
did.
another Newfoundland political icon, that he said dealing with Trudeau, he always worried as a politician that Trudeau would take a principle to the point where he forgot the primary objective. And the primary objective is to govern, do what's best for the people.
What's with the fingers, Sims?
I wonder if people won't look back on the Stephen Harper-Danny Williams relationship and say, the breakdown of that relationship was bad for the people.
Do you have regrets about that at all? Like
John Efford to the left there.
Absolutely necessary.
Stephen Harper to the right.
If I hadn't been ready to move on, I would have.
Danny the Red Tory.
You know, to be quite honest.
In the middle all night.
I had a 10-year window, and his window didn't coincide directly with mine. So anyway, that left a very bad taste.
This is the Hibernia
We're just going to dig
oil
in
development over here on screen. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Premier. Mr. Former Premier, sir. This is the Hibernia oil development. I'm going to take my screen capture this away. I won't remember that. Let's see if I can get it to... No, I can't. This is concrete. This part of the structure is concrete and extends all the way down to the sea floor. It's called a gravity-based structure. GBS. I'll write it on the screen too. Doesn't float, but it can float. It has the option of floating or sinking, and resting on the bottom, it's several hundred meters deep. Quite a large construction filled full of ballast can be flooded as well, but made out of concrete with a specific type of structure to be resistant to icebergs and the like. And without further ado,
that left a very bad taste in my mouth, so then I said, fine, we're just going to dig in directly with the oil companies. So we went to the oil companies and said, oil's going to stay in the ground. If you're not interested in our terms, then that's it. They pulled back from negotiation. They indicated that the negotiation was over.
Some of the business communities out there were wanting the deal, but the grassroots folks, they stayed by it, you know, hold off and get the right deal.
Like it a deal!
He knew they were coming back. He said it repeatedly. They will be back. They got nowhere else to go. This is a good environment to develop oil offshore. He said they'll be back.
There were times, early days, where, you know, we would look at each other, or I would say to myself, you can't do that. That's not going to work. And
yet,
but it always worked.
We drove them to the wall, and then they finally came back and said, okay, we're prepared to talk. We went into a long, protracted negotiation. The ultimate outcome was that we got equity, that we got a good royalty, that we had a super royalty, which in fact will mean many tens of billions of dollars to the provincial treasury over time.
Let it rain.
Politics is a sport here. You comment on it, you have favorite players, big personalities do well, like a John Crosby or a Danny Williams, and people will kind of turn on someone who's boring pretty quick, right? Because you don't just want someone to pave roads and hand out baby bonus checks. You also want someone who is going to explode every now and then, or say something wrong, or give you something to talk about. Otherwise, what's the sense of having them there? You know, unless they're called into the radio that day, it's like, you know, freaking out. Poor old Randy.
Danny has to know Paul McCartney.
And one of the things I noticed that morning is that the #1 story in our newscast was about the Hebron oil development. Another big win for Danny. The fourth story down in the newscast was about the Newfoundland fishery. In the preamble, not thinking too much about it, made a comment along the lines of, to the audience, something like, you know, isn't it interesting? That was a time in our history when what was the fourth story in our newscast this morning would have been #1.
That was one of my thin-skinned moments where I was just driving along the car by myself, because, you know, I never had a chauffeur or had anybody drive me. You know, so I just got to call in. I got to call in.
Oh man, I forgot. I forgot the
producer
key
in your ear
item.
saying, Randy.
Key item in Mr. Williams' time as premier. Why did he have the public support that he did? I can give you an actual physical reason why people trusted him like no other. He didn't only drive himself to work that day. He didn't take a salary as premier. Never did. Never took a salary as premier. Now, that's not the only thing he did when he was premier. I'm not saying he's a fucking angel. All I'm saying is he didn't have salary either.
I got to call in. So I called him by the side of the road.
Producer in your ear is saying, Randy, Premier is on line 2.
Because I've had several calls from people who heard your opening comment
and said, "Why is he being negative this morning?" But I wasn't being negative.
I can't understand for the life of me why, when we've now negotiated another deal here.
He was, what we would say in local terms, he was savage butt.
A lot of wonderful things happening in Newfoundland and Labrador, and we don't need that kind of pessimism and crap coming out of your mouth in the mornings, I can tell you right now.
Do you think that was pessimism?
Pessimism.
To pose that? Why? To pose that question?
I wrote a book around about this time, shortly after this occurred.
And the negative people in this province that have kept those lobsters clawed back in the pot year after year after year. But I refuse to listen to pessimists like you. We're going to move forward, and we're going to do it despite you. Now, you have a nice day. Thank you very much.
What was that all about?
Goodbye.
Wow. Wow. All right. Goodbye.
I was actually left for the first time in 40-some-odd years.
Speechless.
With not a word to say. I didn't know what to do.
That particular morning was, and I know my staff had to be in the office, listening to open line, going, "What is he doing? Why did he holler about it?" I said, "Well, this is a good announcement. Why don't we just let that go?" But I'm the type of guy sometimes who can't let things pass, and Randy's a good match for me too.
Sometimes you would just say you know you're doing the right thing, and you have 95% of the people in the province support you. What about the other 5%? I need them to understand.
So he would have been a good actor, you know? As long as he only played angry people, he would be a great actor. Like a 70s cop show, you know? I hear, take my badge, take my badge. You know, that kind of guy, he'd be great.
Giggity, 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 giggity. Giggity, giggity. Watch his name.
You know? I hear, take my badge, take my badge. You know, that kind of guy, he'd be great. Cop show, you know? As long
About the other 5%, I need them to understand.
So he would have been a good actor, you know? As long as he only played angry people, he would be a great...
He would have been. He would have been.
Great actor. Like a 70s cop show, you know? I hear, take my badge, take my badge.
No, man.
You know, that kind of guy, he'd be great.
Fucking Republican
No,
oil.
I don't think so. I don't remember him being overly stubborn. I don't think so. Oh, I got to stick up for him somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Mother's duty.
He did force his hand a lot. He pushed his way through. You know, he took, I guess, sort of a more business approach than political, and kind of is a bit his way or the highway.
He stood on his 2 feet, and he didn't back down.
He wasn't intimidated. That's what I liked about him. It seemed like former premiers seemed to bend over backwards to please the Canadian government, you know. But he sort of said, no, you know, if we're not going to get what we're going to get, like for example, the oil. He said, we'll keep the oil, you know, in the ground if we have to. We're not going to give it away.
The Premier felt
Meanwhile,
that,
in Vietnam,
you know, ultimately we had campaigned and fought for, you know, our term of office to be treated fairly within the Canadian Federation, and he felt the same should be, you know, the way we, as a provincial government, were treating the Aboriginal peoples of the province. So.
Aboriginal people, and I've seen them coast to coast in this country, they all feel they've been wronged. There are a lot of very serious issues where there's been neglect by federal and provincial government. Like us, at a similar level, they just want fair treatment from the people who are governing them. And if I'm going to seek it from Ottawa, then I need to give it to the Aboriginal people in our province as well.
Final document to be signed will be the Labrador Inuit Comprehensive Land Claims Agreement.
I have no qualms with this part of the documentary.
1959, the government of Newfoundland at that time closed the communities of Newtak and Hebron. Today, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, on behalf of the citizens of the province, apologizes to the Inuit of Newtak and Hebron.
We accept your apology for ourselves, our ancestors, and our descendants. We have waited over 45 painful years for this apology, and we accept it because we want the pain and the hurting to stop.
Good. We're good to go.
Don't turn on the radio or you might get mad. Sorry.
Okay, so we're kind of tight on time, actually.
It became apparent to us all that people think he's larger than life.
Downtown.
Dad'll come, drop by and say, you know, come on, Abby, Gabe, Charlie, let's go to a movie. They even can't go to a movie with him now. People just come up and You know, they want an autograph or they want to just sit there and chat and chat. It's too hard to be in the public with them, you know, unless he's in one of his nice cars and Gabriel has no problem going with him then. That part of it's hard. You lose your dad to politics. Politics just picks away, picks away.
Thank you.
Has politics changed and has it affected his personal relationships and his family? Yes, it has. And I don't think I need to sit here and explain what's happened. That's, you know, it's public knowledge that he's
sentimentality is a horrible thing.
And would that have happened had the politics not come along? Who knows?
This actually shows four of my grandchildren. We now have 2 more grandchildren, and because they're infants and babies, they were both born, 2 boys, both born in the last 6 months. You know, the family is growing in leaps and bounds, and I gotta tell you, that's a really important part of my life.
When he sets his mind on something and he envisions something, it's like he just sees it in his mind and he just goes ahead and does it and fulfills it and makes sure it's done, and he doesn't stop until it's finished. And I think that's the same thing with politics, you know, why he got in and why he got out.
I finally got the Lower Churchill put together as a deal. I thought, okay, it's time to go. And I decided, you know, my bucket list was done from my perspective. And, you know, you can wear out your welcome. I'm also a believer that if you stay around too long, you'll start to believe your own bullshit, and people around you will start to cover you with your own bullshit, and then you know, so it's done. That's why I decided to go on.
Danny Williams shocked Newfoundland and Labrador and the rest of the country with the announcement that he was resigning as premier.
Did you get the oil?
Yes, Codfather.
Did you get Lower Churchill?
Yes, Codfather.
Did you throw a tantrum like a huge baby every time you didn't
Gordon
get your way?
Pinsent is a actor, yeah?
Yeah, he did that. Yeah.
Going from a have-not province to a have province is huge. If nothing else happened, there was no other legacy, just that. What that does for Newfoundlanders, what that does for some kid who's going to go on a school trip to Ontario, just that, watching that change, and all of a sudden people are puffed up their chest, you know, and like, oh yes, that crowd over there and our oil money and all this stuff, you know, and it's great. That kind of fixes things for a lot of people, generationally, mentally.
I don't think I was prepared at all for the emotion of that day, if you watch some of the footage. And, you know, I remember even after my hairdresser said to me, she said, you know, everyone in the salon stopped and they just watched the TV. Right up until that morning, nobody knew. I mean, it was a shock. And then I remember his mom was coming in. And we got the call from security. CBC has Mrs. Williams. And it was just mayhem on the floor. Get down to the lobby.
To my family, and in particular my mother, who has always been, I can't look at her because I'm going to lose it, has always been such an inspiration to me. She has been the ultimate advisor, the political matriarch, my role model, and more than anything, she's just the best mom.
Sentimentality is a horrible
this far together, and the best is yet to come. I will miss you, and I love you all. God guard thee, Newfoundland, Labrador.
Where's he going? To the promised land, somewhere else. No, not quite true.
He announced that he was leaving, and I mean, it was like a friggin' funeral. You know, people were devastated. If Danny Williams leaves,
then the sky opened up and he was assumed up into heaven
People
upon a beam of light.
And
with
I'm sure it's gonna be
Isaiah.
somebody probably have a picture of
Enoch.
Danny in her casket, you know?
And some other dude I'd never heard of before.
But also people will crack open Joey's coffin and stick a stake through it to make sure he's still dead. And there'll be people sharpening stakes around Danny's casket too. But that's when you know you made a difference.
He was straight up. He ran Newfoundland as if it was his own business.
I would say he was the leader that this province needed at the time.
It's nice being able to tell somebody you're from Newfoundland and have pride in it.
He made us feel proud of ourselves, right?
along with him being who he is, which he should be proud of himself, period. But it even made me feel proud of myself because he was a premier.
She said, we'll never have anybody again like him. I said, yes, you will, that's it. After a while, that's it, he'll be getting on your nerves. And that's what happens, they get fed up with him all. When you're out in the public eye, you know, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Well, there you go, girl. Oh, jeez. Must be nice. Don't ask the car, huh? And use this car, right? Jeez, I ain't complaining. Yeah. Gotta tell you, I once made music for this man, and he compensated me well for my efforts. And I bear him no ill will for that exchange, nor in any other regard. I do wonder, though. There's another local musician here.
If you're fortunate enough to be privileged, then you have to take the shit. You've got to be prepared to be a target too. I just think from my own personal perspective, and even from a leadership perspective, whether it happens to be a business leader or a lawyer making a decision or a politician as a leader making a decision, you need to be decisive and stand by it. You don't know you're right. You think you're right, and you hope you're right, and if you've done all your homework, your chances are you're going to be right. From a political perspective, you know, I could be 50 years before, I won't be around, but I could be 20 years before I find out whether, you know, I was right or not. But some things have to stand the test of time.
Oh, what did I say there earlier about the cable company? Remember? There's Johnson Insurance. Yeah, I can't. There's Rogers, the cable company. Air Canada, the Telegram. Anything else local? Madrid, I think. Radio stations, beer. Why? Compelling watching, I'm sure. The music. The music is interesting. I'll kill that now just in case I don't get too many more friggin' thingy strikes for the rest of the evening. Aha. Seeing as that's there, I can... No, I won't quit. I just clear it. Much less clutter. So did I crucify the man too much, or did I give him just enough? I'll leave that to you to decide. I think I'm going to stop streaming for all of maybe half an hour and start again. Thanks for watching. Comment below.